Hello, I'm Mr. Samsa. I am one of your social studies teachers. I have created this presentation to help you get prepared for your first test of the school year. This is the unit review for Unit 2A on Mesopotamia. So I'm going to go over everything that's on the study guide for the Unit 2 test. So if you don't have your study guide out, what I would recommend doing right now is pause this recording, go back to the message board, get the study guide out, open it up, and get ready to take some notes on it. Whether you're going to handwrite it and you have it printed out, or handwritten it in a notebook, that'll work. Or if you want to type on it, that'll work too. I want you to remember this is a recording. So, after I go through a question, if you need to pause it, you can certainly pause it and take your notes. Or if you need to back it up and see something again or hear something again, you can do that as well. I'm going through the study guide. I'm going to tell you everything you need to know for the test. So be sure you're ready, to take notes and listen to what we have to say about these topics. And if you have any questions about anything that's on the study guide or anything I say in the recording, feel free to let me know. All right, I'm going to turn off my camera because as I'm going through this, it can be a little bit distracting to me sometimes, and it can mess up the recording as well. So I'm going to stop that, and then we'll go ahead and get started here. All right, here we go. All right, first item on your study guide says, what event led to the dispersal of Jewish people throughout the Babylonian Empire, the Diaspora? So the dispersal of Jewish people is the Diaspora. We'll probably come back to that a little bit later. In what year did this event happen? Okay, so you will see this timeline on your you'll see this timeline on your test. And the event we're looking for here is this one down here in 587 BCE. So what year did this event happen? So that's the second part. 587, that's the box we're looking at. And what happens is the Babylonians, they conquer and destroy Jerusalem. Okay, so Babylon is in what's now present-day Iraq, and Jerusalem, now in present-day Israel. So the Babylonians come over to Jerusalem in what's now Israel, and they conquer Jerusalem. And when they do that, the Jewish people who had lived in Jerusalem, they flee. They start to spread out, and that marks the beginning of what we now know as the Diaspora. So this is our correct answer here. 587 BCE is the beginning of the Diaspora when Babylon conquers and destroys Jerusalem. All right, now we got that one. Let's go to the next one. Where was Phoenicia? Where did Phoenicia have colonies and conduct most of its trading? All right, what you should have learned in your unit was that, the Phoenicians, they were like sea people. They sailed a lot, they traveled a lot, and they were known for trading across the Mediterranean Sea. So what you can see here is Phoenicia is over here in what's now, Israel, Lebanon, in this reddish color, and their colonies are this yellowish color. This is the map you'll see on the test again. And, there were other people living in these colored areas as well. And those were all places, Phoenicia would have contact with. And so what we can figure out from the map, or what we might infer from the map, is that, the Phoenicians traded with people through Africa and Europe. Okay, so where did Phoenicia have colonies? Africa and Europe. That's probably where they conducted most of their trade. Africa and Europe. Okay, so if we get Africa and Europe on this one, we'll be in good shape. Okay, Africa and Europe. We're going to the next one. What is the Talmud? What is the Torah? So your lessons in this unit told us quite a bit about Judaism, and two of the books that the lessons message are the Talmud and the Torah. All right, so the Talmud is a collection of oral teachings and commentaries about the Hebrew Bible, Jewish law, and teachings of Moses. So that would be writing about. The Talmud is the writing about these texts, about the beliefs of Judaism, basically. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. Okay, so remember, the Torah is the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, and that's the Old Testament. Okay, so the Torah includes, Genesis and Exodus and so on. Then the Hebrew Bible includes this note as well. The Hebrew Bible is both history of Jewish ancestors, and Jews believe that it reveals God's will as carried out in human events. The Hebrew Bible is the basis for the Christian Old Testament. Those are some notes straight from your textbook, okay? But again, Talmud, teachings of Moses, writings about, the Hebrew Bible. Torah, first 5 books of Hebrew Bible, okay? It's kind of a good thing to know. Let's look at the next one. What was cuneiform? Be sure you know what the cuneiform looks like. Okay, so there'll be a picture of cuneiform on your test, and you need to be able to identify it. So remember, cuneiform is the name for the Sumerian system of writing. It looks like this. It uses triangle-shaped symbols. So the triangles and the way they were arranged and the direction they went would indicate something to the Sumerians who would read this. Okay, so cuneiform is one of the world's oldest systems of writing. And again, it's the Sumerian system of writing, and it uses these triangle shapes. Okay. What is the most significant thing about Sumer? Sumer is the world's first civilization. This is the first place that people started to live together and work together and stay in one spot until the civilization in Sumer developed. People were hunters and gatherers. They were nomadic. They would, move around and follow their food sources and just kind of, live off the land in a non-systematic way, I guess you would say. Once Sumer develops, this is when people learn to farm and people start to stay in one spot and build buildings, like real buildings, for the first time. They develop art and, a government and things of that sort. So Sumer is the world's first civilization. All right. How did Judaism represent a change to religion in ancient times when it developed? The biggest thing about Judaism is it's our first monotheistic religion. Monotheistic, one God. That there is one God. Okay, so if you write down, Judaism, world's first monotheistic religion, the belief in one God, the first religion to believe in one God. And then Judaism also included laws about what was right and wrong. They actually, part of their religion was saying, made distinction between right and wrong. Before this time, there were many gods, and people just tried to please the gods. A lot of times, they were sort of just guessing. And there was probably some ideas about what you could or what you should or should not do. But Judaism is the first one that includes those things about right and wrong into its religion. But if you have the one God, you'll be on the right track here. All right, what were the key characteristics of Hammurabi's code? On the test, you're going to see a quote, okay, from Hammurabi's code, and you'll have to read the quote and kind of figure out what it means. But some of the key things you should know about Hammurabi's code, which you should definitely understand, it's one of the world's first written law codes, establishing the rule of law. That means, the law kind of guided everything. Hammurabi's code is famous for an eye thinking. Okay, Hammurabi's code is where that idea eye for an eye comes from. It's actually written into Hammurabi's code. It says if a person takes an eye, then that person gets to take the other person's eye. It's an eye for an eye. One of the key things about Hammurabi's code that is revealing about ancient societies, I guess you would say, is not everyone was equal under the law. It actually said in the law, that important people could get more than people who were considered less important. So, a rich person would get more under the law or had more rights under the law. They didn't really think about rights the way we do, but the rich people were entitled to more under the law than maybe servants were, for example. Okay, so not everyone was equal under the law. That's kind of a key distinction and something that's very different from what we're used to. So that's an important note to have too. Okay, if you got questions about that one, feel free to let me know. All right, kind of an unusual little question here, but something that's in your textbook. What was the official religion of the Persian Empire, and what did it teach? All right, so Persia is what we now consider to be Iran. It would have extended out into all of this pink area at one point. We're going to come back to the Persian Empire when we study Greece, because the Persians tried to take over Greece. But on our map here, it's all of this that's in pink. And this is Iran now, which is kind of what we think of as Persia. The Persian Empire, they were Zoroastrians. Their official religion was Zoroastrianism. Okay, so if you remember the one that starts with a Z, so try and write that down. And key belief of Zoroastrianism is just the universe is a struggle between good and evil. Okay, Zoroastrianism is still around. It's still around in ways that maybe some of Greek mythology or Egyptian mythology or Roman mythology is not. Like, people still are Zoroastrians, but there's not very many of them anymore. But it is still around. And again, the key belief here is the universe is a struggle between good and evil. All right, let's take a look at this one. Why did Israelites believe that Canaan, I'm having a hard time with that word this morning, Canaan was the promised land? Excuse me. Why did Israelites believe that Canaan was the promised land? According to the Torah, okay, remember the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. So that's very, very early ancient history. There includes, Exodus, for example. According to the Torah, God made a covenant with Abraham that Canaan would belong to Abraham's descendants. Okay, so Abraham did receive the word from God. And what God told him is that this land, what now we consider to be Israel, would belong to Abraham's descendants. Okay, and a covenant is a promise. So God promised this land to Israel. So that's why Canaan is thought to be the promised land, is because God promised this land to Israel. And you can kind of see this map kind of shows about where that land was considered to be when Abraham received the word. And it's now Israel. That's now Israel. So that is why Canaan is the promised land. All right, what was the diaspora? We talked about the diaspora a little bit earlier, and then how did the diaspora impact worship for Jewish people? Okay, so the diaspora is spreading out. Okay, spreading out. It's this, in this sense, it's the spreading out of Jewish people, but you can use the word diaspora for the spreading out of other types of people. The Babylonian Empire destroyed Jerusalem and Solomon's temple in 587 BCE. We mentioned that a little bit earlier. This event forced Jews to flee their homeland. So Babylon destroys Jerusalem. The Jewish people who live there, they flee. They spread out. Okay, so the diaspora is the term for the community of Jewish people living outside of Israel. Diaspora, it's a Greek word, means dispersal or scattered. All right, because Jews lived outside of Jerusalem, they could not worship at the temple. Okay, so before this time, when Jewish people wanted to go to their religious service, they would go to the temple. But now that they're spread out, they can't go to the temple. So they have to, develop a new way to worship. And what they develop is a building or a place that has significance to them called a synagogue. And, synagogue is still sort of a Jewish church. Your town might have a synagogue in it. There's not as many in South Carolina, but they're out there. And so synagogues became important centers for worship and gathering. Okay, so you can think of a synagogue as a Jewish church. So the key impact of the diaspora was the development of synagogues as Jewish centers of worship and gathering. Okay. Again, if you had questions about that one, feel free to let me know. Where is Mesopotamia? And what does the word Mesopotamia mean? Okay, so let's start with what does the word Mesopotamia mean? Meso is middle. Potamia is river. Okay, so Mesopotamia means between the rivers or the middle of the rivers. Meso is Greek for middle, and Potamia or Potamos is river. You think of a hippopotamus. A hippopotamus is a river horse. Potamos, river. Hippo, horse. Hippopotamus, river horse. Mesopotamia, between the rivers, the middle of the rivers. Okay, so Mesopotamia then is the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. If you look at my map down here, you can see the Euphrates River is the one a little to the left, which would be the west, and the Tigris is the one to the right, a little to the east, and that land in between those two rivers is Mesopotamia. It's an excellent area for farming because the rivers make the soil fertile, plentiful, and good place for farming. And so this encouraged the world's first farmers and the world's first civilization. Okay, so Mesopotamia, between the rivers. What was the role of priests in Sumerian city-states? Priests communicated with the gods. Sumerians believed that only priests could determine what the gods wanted. Okay, so back before there was any monotheistic religion, people just kind of thought, the gods were controlling everything, and the gods were, determine when it would rain, and if the crops would be good and all that. So it was up to the priests, or people thought it was up to the priests to, figure out what the gods wanted and how to keep the gods happy. And what the people needed to do to, be sure that the gods took care of them. And so that was the priest's job. And the Sumerians believed that only priests could determine what the gods want. This picture is of a ziggurat, which is usually the priest would go up on top of that thing and they would say, "Oh gods, how can we keep you happy?" So that was the job of the priest, communicate with the gods. Why did the first civilizations develop in Mesopotamia? The key thing here is the water. We said earlier, just a minute ago, Mesopotamia, between the rivers, the land between the rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers flooded in a reliable way, at least they knew it was going to happen, that made the soil good for farming. Okay, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flooded in a reliable way that made the soil good for farming. And then farmers also were able to develop irrigation techniques that brought water to places of need. Irrigation is the idea that really you're just bringing water to a place that you need it. If you're ever driving around town, or maybe even at your house, you have a sprinkler system, you see the sprinklers on, they pop up out of the ground, that's irrigation. Or if you're out driving past a farm and you see the fields being watered with those big machine things. I don't even know what they're called. I guess they're called sprinklers too. That's all irrigation. Okay, so irrigation, sprinkler, bringing water to places of need. But yeah, the key thing here are these 2 points. Okay, so make sure you get both of these. Try not to just write down water. Try to write down both of these points because that's what you need to know. But you can summarize them by saying water. All right. What relationship does the commandment, remember the Sabbath day, relate to? It's a God believer relationship. Okay. Sabbath day is the day of worship. And that's a God believer commandment. I'm not sure your book said a lot about this, which is why I'm keeping this one short. I don't want to stray too far from your text. So you can get that one down. How was the Assyrian Empire organized, and why did the emperor choose this structure? All right, the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrian Empire was known, it was a very strong military. It develops in 600 BCE, or the 600s BCE, so between 700 BCE to 600 BC. I should have said this earlier, but remember those BCE years, they count down. So like 700 is before 600 in years in BCE, but not the point of this question. If you do have questions about that, let me know. So Assyrian Empire, how was it organized? The Assyrians, they divided the empire into 70 provinces. Province, kind of like a state. Okay, kind of like a state. Each ruler had a governor, each province had a governor who reported to the ruler. I'm having a hard time with this one. So if you see all these little areas here, these are the provinces, and then each province had a governor who was in charge of the province, and he reported back to the ruler about, how things are going and what they were doing. Assyrian rulers believed this structure allowed them to keep control of distant lands. So they came up with this idea that the ruler kind of recognized, like, this is a big area. They didn't have internet. They didn't have telephones. They didn't even have fax machines. They didn't have cars or planes or anything like that. So it was hard to keep control of a big area. So the idea was, let's put people in each of these areas to keep control of them. and that will help us govern and control such a large area. How did the Phoenicians influence the Greeks? They influenced, so the Phoenicians developed a writing system that then influenced the Greek writing system. So you can see here, these are some Phoenician letters, and these are the Greek letters. I know a little Greek. This is alpha, beta, gamma, delta, which now is A, B, C, D. But so writing system is one of the main one. And then weights and measures is the other one. I looked through your book. I think your book didn't say a ton about weights and measures, but make sure you write that down on your study guide. Writing system, weights and measures. All right, what strategies did Darius use to maintain control of the Persian Empire? This is going to sound familiar. He provided local rulers with some control. So just like the Assyrians had the local rulers in each of the provinces, the Persians do the same thing. And then he also was known for building roads throughout their empire. So this is, if you look here, this is Persia in the green, quite a large empire. Mentioned this earlier when we talked about Zoroastrianism. So he had local rulers, handling things and helping out and telling, him what was going on in places. And then he was also known for building these roads. You can see this red one here. This map is from your book. The Great Royal Road, which went from, kind of the center of the Persian Empire over towards the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, so make sure you get both of those. All right, that brings us to our short answer questions. Short answer responses should be in paragraph form. Please write in paragraph form. Okay, try to avoid lists. Really, you need to avoid the lists on these. Don't be numbering your reasons or stuff like that. Write in a paragraph form. Should be probably 3 to 4 sentences in most cases. 2 sentences is usually not enough. 1 is almost always definitely not enough. You don't really need to go to 5. If you go to 5 or 6 or 7, that's perfectly fine. But you want to be thinking, I need at least 3 to 4 sentences. So that's like an introduction sentence, a couple examples that answer the question, and then a concluding sentence. Okay, so if you think about it that way, introduction, 2 examples, conclusion. 4 sentences, easy. That's the key in social studies is specific examples. Okay, you want to show that your answer is correct. So, for example, you don't just want to say this is the answer. You want to give examples that show this is the answer. So as we go through these questions, we'll talk about that. Some of these questions here are maybe not the best questions to start us off with, but we'll be okay. Please use conventions like capitalization and punctuation. If you will type these, if you're not familiar with using your keyboard, please try to become more and more familiar with using it. Understand that we're still learning this stuff. That's certainly okay, but you need to use capital letters. It really infuriates me to see 6th graders who are not using capital letters. Capital letters is something you learned about in 1st grade. So when we get to 6th grade and we're not seeing capital letters, it's not good. You will not lose any points for spelling. These words are hard to spell. It's perfectly fine to have misspelled words. Do your best to spell everything correctly, but if you don't know how to spell Zoroastrianism, which I don't think you'll need to type on any of these answers, that's perfectly okay. All right, nothing to worry about. And a note here: do not copy information off the internet. We, your teachers, we know what's on the internet. We know about Brainly.com. We know about Jiska. Okay, you are not fooling us. All right. And kind of what ends up happens is I start seeing the same answers word for word over again. And it's not in the textbook. It's off of these sites. The information you get off of there, sometimes it's wrong. Okay. A lot of times it's wrong, or it's not complete, or it's not good. So don't be copying stuff off the internet. And really, the reason is not so much that it's like, you can't use the internet in real life, but when you do that, your teachers, the point of school is to learn. And so if you're copying stuff off the internet, then your teachers, we can't determine what you've learned when you copy answers from the internet. We don't know that you've learned anything. All it shows us is that you know how to Google. Okay. Which, if that's what you think is the key to life, fine, but I'm not going to argue with you too much about it. But you really should be developing your human faculties, your humanity, and your capabilities as a person. And just plugging stuff into Google, I mean, that will turn you into a robot real quick. So let's work on learning, and kind of developing our ideas and our thoughts to become better and more complete humans. Okay. All right. So that's my word about that. All right, first question. What is the connection between the seafaring natures of the Phoenicians and the spread of their civilizations? Okay, this is not a quick trick question. We don't need to overthink this. See pages 68 to 70. You want to discuss the areas where the Phoenicians explored. We talked about this earlier. They are sailing across the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, you're going to discuss how Phoenician culture spread to these places, which again, they sailed to places like Greece. They met with the Greeks. They spread their culture these places. They shared with them a writing system that then developed the Greek alphabet. This travel happened because they were looking to trade. So if you write a short little answer here about, the Phoenicians were seafaring people. They sailed around the Mediterranean Sea. They had contact with people like the Greeks. And when they met with the Greeks, they were able to share their culture and share things like an alphabet. All of this sharing happened because the Phoenicians were looking to trade. Okay, that's the gist of what you want to have for this answer. Okay. Why does the Talmud emphasize studying Jewish writings? Okay, so see page 79. Discuss what the Talmud is. So remember, the Talmud is teachings. It's teachings about the Jewish law. It's the discussion of what Jews believe or what Judaism believes. Okay. You probably want to discuss that the Talmud provides clarification and interpretation of Jewish law. Okay, so remember that Jewish law, the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, is very, very old. Okay, so the Talmud is the attempt to look at something that's very, very old and explain this is what we believe. So that's why it's important to Judaism to understand what the Jewish belief system is. Okay, so you want to write a little bit about that. Again, this is kind of what I mean about these not being great questions to start off our year, because this one is kind of a little fuzzy in my opinion. But you just want to discuss that the Talmud emphasizes, or rather than emphasize, the Talmud helps Jews to understand their religion better. I think that's probably maybe the best way to say it. But review page 79 just for a little more detail there. And then lastly, what are some ways that Judaism influenced modern society? Okay, this one is a little easier to construct an answer on. Look at pages 88 to 90. Okay, there's lots of examples here. You can discuss that Judaism influences our laws. Be sure you say how it influences our laws. Think about the 10 Commandments, for example. Okay, Judaism brings us the 10 Commandments from the Old Testament, which Christians consider to be the Old Testament, which is also the Hebrew Bible. So things like, thou shalt not murder, stuff like that. Animal rights. Your book discusses animal rights. Your book discusses environmental protections. You want examples of these things and how they come from Judaism. Okay. So what you want to try to avoid here is, instead of saying Judaism influences laws, animal rights, and environmental protections, you need to say an example of a law that Judaism influenced, an example of animal rights that Judaism influenced, an example of environmental protections that Judaism influences, if you can, and if you can find that in your textbook. Okay. All right. Well, that brings me to the end of our presentation. I hope this is helpful for you. Remember, this is a recording, so if you need to watch it again, you'll be able to do that. If you have any questions about anything I talked about, please let me know, or let your social studies teacher know, Mrs. Chandler or Mrs. Corley. We will be happy to help you, or happy to clarify anything. If you have any questions about the short answer questions, or if you're kind of a little fuzzy on some of those, feel free to let us know. We'll be happy to explain those things to you in more detail. Feel free to call or send us a webmail. Always happy to help. All right. Best of luck to you. First test, so let's really get off to a good start here. And once again, if you need anything, do let us know.